They thought she wouldn't notice anything, until her granddaughter told her what had happened during the night while her grandmother was asleep. Her daughter and son-in-law wanted to take everything away, quietly under the guise of caring, but she heard them, turned on the camera, and showed them who was the boss in the house. See what happens when people write you off too soon. Subscribe, and write in the comments which city you're watching from. Mary Lawrence awoke before the first light brushed the corners of her bedroom. Her body, long trained by years of quiet habit, needed no alarm. The old brass clock on the dresser showed 5:31. She lay still for a moment, listening to the familiar hush of the house, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant creak of the floorboards contracting with the early chill, the murmur of silence that only truly existed before the world stirred awake. She rose without turning on the light. Her slippers waited neatly by the bed, and the cardigan draped over the chair was exactly where she'd left it the night before. She moved through the hallway with the ease of someone who had walked it for over 40 years, tracing a path that felt more remembered than chosen. Downstairs, the kitchen welcomed her like an old friend. The worn grooves in the floor where her husband Richard used to stand with his coffee, the faint scent of lemon oil from yesterday's cleaning, the gentle clink of the mug as she pulled it from the cabinet. The kettle began to warm on the stove, and Mary filled the teapot with Earl Grey, placing 2 sugar cubes in her mug the way she always had. The wooden table, still scarred from years of homework and meals and grandchildren's art projects, reflected the dim yellow light of the overhead fixture. Outside, the garden sat in the heavy pre-dawn stillness, the raised beds cloaked in dew. Richard had built those beds the year after he retired, planting tomatoes and herbs with a stubborn devotion that defied his arthritis. She had thought then they'd have decades more to enjoy them. They'd only had 2. After his death, the house had remained, but everything inside it began to shift. Not suddenly, not in loud gestures, but in the quiet way sand softens a sharp edge. Evelyn, her only daughter, had asked to move in during what she'd called a transitional phase after a job change. John had come with her, confident, charming at first, carrying more ambition than affection. Mary had welcomed them both. It was what family did. Then came the shared groceries, the casual mention of splitting bills that Mary somehow always paid in full, the suggestion that maybe it made more sense for Lily to take Mary's old bedroom upstairs so Evelyn and John could have more space. Mary had agreed to it all. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself Richard would have done the same. The kettle whistled softly. Mary poured the water over the tea leaves and stirred. She wasn't resentful, not then. She liked having Lily around, her small voice echoing down the hallway, her laughter bright and unfiltered. Lily still crawled into her lap when she was tired and called her Gran with the warmest affection. It was the others who had changed. Evelyn no longer asked before rearranging furniture or tossing out things Mary hadn't labeled. John had started keeping a spare key to Mary's study, though he claimed it was just in case. And the house, once her sanctuary, began to feel less like a home and more like a space she maintained for others. Mary reached for the milk in the fridge and noticed again how different the kitchen felt. John had replaced the old brass knobs on the drawers with sleek, modern chrome ones without asking. Evelyn had switched the curtains, citing allergies. Mary hadn't resisted. She hadn't wanted to cause ripples. The first real ripple came that morning. Mary turned back toward the table, intending to sit for her tea, when she noticed a small figure perched on the stool by the counter. Lily, still in her space-themed pajamas, her feet dangling just above the tiles, watched her with wide, unblinking eyes. Mary hadn't heard her come in. Lily had always been light on her feet, a wisp of movement rather than a child. Mary smiled and walked over. She brushed a loose curl from Lily's face, noting the quiet seriousness in the girl's eyes. Lily reached into the ceramic jar for a cracker and crunched softly, then looked up at her grandmother with a peculiar calm. "Gran," she whispered, "I saw Uncle John in your room last night." Mary's hand paused midair. A slow thrum of alertness bloomed in her chest. Lily continued, her voice low. "He opened your closet. I think he took something." The words were soft but sharp. Mary blinked, her thoughts fluttering. Lily wasn't the sort to lie. But this was different. She forced a smile and said nothing for a long moment. The child, unaware of the storm she had stirred, continued eating, then hopped off the stool and disappeared into the living room, leaving behind the echo of something Mary couldn't yet name. Mary returned to her tea, but the warmth had left it. She sat slowly, her fingers wrapped around the mug for steadiness rather than comfort. Could it be true? Had John? She hated the direction of her own thoughts. He was her daughter's husband. He lived under her roof. He had access, yes, but that didn't mean. She closed her eyes and inhaled. But something had changed in the air, a shift too quiet to name, but too real to ignore. She thought about her bedroom door. Had she locked it last night? She couldn't recall. Her fingers tightened around the cup. Her mind, long trusted, replayed every detail of the past week. Had anything looked moved? Was anything missing? The day passed in small, nervous tasks. Mary dusted rooms that were already clean, rearranged linens she'd folded 2 days ago. She tried not to look at John when he passed through the kitchen or returned from errands. He smiled the way he always did, broad, empty, transactional. Evelyn was on a work call most of the day, snapping at agents and clients, laughing in that strained way Mary had come to recognize as exhaustion. That evening, Mary climbed the stairs slowly. Her bedroom smelled faintly of lavender, the way she liked it. But something in the air was off. She moved to the corner where the small safe sat behind a basket of scarves. The basket had shifted, only slightly but enough. She opened the safe and stared. She didn't count the cash. She didn't have to. Her hands knew the weight of those bundles. It was thinner, lighter. She sat back on her heels. Her chest felt tight, not with panic, but with a bone-deep weariness. She remembered how Evelyn had once said, only half joking, "Why do you keep actual cash in there?" "That's so outdated," John had agreed, laughing. "Hope you're not hiding treasure, Mom." Mary closed the safe, locked it carefully, and stood. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. She made no accusations, asked no questions. She moved as she always had, gentle, deliberate, composed. But her thoughts did not quiet. They turned slowly, like the gears of an old clock returning to motion after long disuse. She watched John more closely now, not suspiciously, strategically. The next morning came too early. Sleep had barely touched her. She walked the hall as the sun rose and paused outside her own door, studying it. Then she turned and went to the garden. Richard's old gloves still hung by the back door. She slipped them on and knelt among the raised beds, pressing her hands into the soil. It grounded her, it always had. But as she pulled a stubborn weed from the basil row, her thoughts returned to what Lily had said. "He opened your closet. I think he took something." That night, as Mary turned down her bed, she placed her old cell phone in the top drawer, its camera facing the room. It was an older model, but functional. She pressed record and closed the drawer halfway, just enough to leave a sliver of vision. Then she switched off the lamp and lay still. She didn't sleep. Not really. Not anymore. The house breathed around her. Floorboards murmured. The night pressed close against the windows. And somewhere, in the distance of her own home, Mary waited for the whisper to return. Mary woke with a start, though her body hadn't truly surrendered to sleep. The house was silent, cloaked in the murmurless dark that clings to the final hours before dawn. Her neck ached from the odd angle she'd lain in, and her right hand was numb where it had curled unconsciously beneath the pillow. She blinked several times, disoriented for a moment, before remembering the drawer beside her bed, the old cell phone still nestled inside, its tiny green light faintly blinking like a pulse in the dark. She reached over and slid the drawer open. The screen had gone black, but when she pressed the button, the recording came to life. Grainy, static-filled at first, then slowly resolving into dim shadows, her bedroom cast in twilight gray. For several minutes, the footage showed nothing more than her sleeping figure, the steady rise and fall of breath beneath the blanket. But just past 3, the door creaked open. He came in like a shadow, cautious but practiced. John. His silhouette filled the frame, paused, then moved toward the closet. Mary watched without blinking as he crouched, pulled the scarf basket aside, and revealed the safe. Her safe. Her stomach clenched. Even in the low resolution, she could see how easily he punched in the code. Her birthday, of course, of harm. He lifted the lid, reached inside, removed a bundle of bills, then gently returned everything as if untouched. Then he was gone. The door whispered shut behind him. Mary sat motionless for a long time, the screen frozen in her palm. There it was, undeniable. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't some late-night imagining or childish misunderstanding. He had taken from her, quietly, repeatedly, while everyone slept. She rose and padded to the kitchen. The kettle hissed and clicked, the only sound in the vast stillness. She didn't bother with tea this time. Instead, she poured herself a glass of water and stood by the window, the glass sweating in her hand. Outside, the raised beds were just visible beneath the pearly dawn. Richard's garden. He'd been so proud of those rows, even when the weeds threatened to overtake them. She closed her eyes and exhaled through her nose. Then she turned back toward the hallway, toward her room, and toward the task that now lay ahead. The day began slowly, filled with ordinary noise. The clatter of breakfast plates, the quick shuffle of Lily's footsteps, Evelyn's voice drifting through the house on another business call. Mary moved among them like always, kind and accommodating, folding dish towels, wiping counters, asking if anyone needed anything. But her mind was elsewhere. Every smile from John, every casual greeting from Evelyn now struck her differently. They felt like cover stories, feigned familiarity layered over a quiet erosion. She retreated to her bedroom after lunch and pulled out her worn spiral notebook, the one Richard had given her when she used to keep track of grocery lists and garden plans. Now she wrote something else, times, dates, the approximate amounts she believed had gone missing. She included everything she could remember, every offhand comment from John, every moment Evelyn had questioned her memory, every small detail that seemed inconsequential until now. Her handwriting remained steady, deliberate. These were not the notes of a confused woman. These were records. Then she dialed a number she hadn't called in nearly 2 years. Susan picked up on the second ring. Mary spoke without preamble. She told Susan everything, Lily's whisper, the camera, the video, the hollow in her chest that had opened when trust was yanked away in the middle of the night. Susan didn't interrupt. She never had. When Mary finished, the line stayed silent for only a beat before Susan responded with calm clarity. Quiet, document, observe, do not accuse, do not confront, not yet, wait, watch, prepare. Mary hung up and sat in the stillness of her room. She felt no urge to cry. There was something almost clinical in the realization now, like a diagnosis confirmed after months of wondering. The pain came not from shock, but from recognition, from the quiet confirmation that the erosion had already taken place. This was not the beginning. It had begun long ago. She drove to the hardware store the next day and bought a newer, smaller hidden camera. It was marketed for nurseries, shaped like a digital clock. She positioned it more carefully this time, across from the safe, embedded on the dresser. Then she tested it, checked the recordings, tested again. John returned 2 days later. He moved faster now, bolder. No hesitation as he entered. No pause before he entered the code. This time he pocketed a larger stack. Mary watched the recording in silence, her lips pressed together in a firm, bloodless line. She copied the footage to a flash drive and placed it inside a labeled envelope, then tucked that envelope inside a book jacket on her shelf. She would not be caught unprepared. In the following days, Mary began to audit every part of her life. She checked bank statements, closed 2 dormant accounts, changed the code on her online banking. She found Evelyn's name listed on an old emergency access form, one she hadn't remembered signing after Richard's funeral. She revoked it. She called the financial institution directly and asked for copies of all recent activity. She created new passwords, updated phone security, set up alerts for every withdrawal over $50. The clerk on the line had been polite, even complimentary. "It's wise to stay ahead of things, Mrs. Lawrence," he had said. "Many people wait until it's too late." She thought about that phrase often over the next few days. Too late. It haunted her, because for years now she had given freely, openly, with love. The house, the food, the space, the safety. She had assumed gratitude where there had only been growing entitlement. Her world had slowly pivoted from independence to quiet servitude, and she had let it happen in the name of motherhood. She made a second flash drive copy and placed it inside her desk drawer, taping it under the false bottom. Another copy went into the spice cabinet, buried beneath jars of cumin and cinnamon bark. She wasn't paranoid. She was finally paying attention. On Thursday evening, John came home late. Mary sat in the den with her knitting, pretending to be absorbed in the rhythmic click of needles. Evelyn was upstairs taking a long shower. John breezed past her, muttered a hello, then stopped. "You look tired," he said. "You sure you're sleeping enough, Mary?" She met his eyes, calm and unreadable. "I rest when I need to." "Just checking," he said, and disappeared down the hall. That night she couldn't stop replaying the words in her mind. Not for concern, for calculation. She wasn't sleeping. She wouldn't notice. It would be easy. Friday morning she scheduled an appointment with an estate lawyer in town. She used Evelyn's maiden name when calling, just to be cautious. The receptionist didn't question it. They scheduled her for Monday morning. Mary circled the date on her calendar, then folded a blank sheet of paper and slid it into her purse, ready to take notes. That weekend, Lily sat at the kitchen table with her crayons, drawing quiet swirls of stars and imaginary birds. Mary watched her, admiring how serious her small brow could be when she focused. When Lily looked up, her eyes searched her grandmother's face for something, perhaps reassurance or warmth, and Mary gave it freely. The child had no part in the deception of her parents. If anything, she was the only reason Mary had noticed in time. On Sunday night, Mary locked her bedroom door for the first time in years. She did it gently, almost reverently, like closing a chapter. The lock clicked into place with a finality that made her heart ache and strengthen all at once. She sat at her desk and opened her notebook again. There she drew a map not of streets or rooms, but of her next steps. Lawyer, bank, titles, will, power of attorney. She drew lines between names and documents, between dates and questions she would ask. She underlined one phrase 3 times. Trust must be earned again. She glanced toward the hallway, where Evelyn's heels clicked distantly. She imagined the conversation they'd had just days ago. Something vague about the future, about making things easier, about having help, just in case. Mary had nodded politely then. Now she knew what it meant. It meant losing her name from her own property. It meant signing away decisions under the pretense of relief. It meant being erased quietly, gently, with love, but not this time. The clock struck midnight. Mary turned off the light and stared into the dark, awake, alert, and steady. Tomorrow she would begin. Monday dawned cold and silver, the sky low with winter clouds that refused to lift. Mary dressed with precision, each movement deliberate. She chose her navy coat, the one Richard had always said made her look like a woman with a purpose. She left the house without telling anyone, her purse neat and zipped, the flash drive nestled inside alongside her handwritten notes and a list of questions. She took the bus to town, sat quietly among commuters and students, staring out the fogged window as the landscape passed, slow and soft and indifferent. The law office was on the second floor of a restored brick building with wide steps and frosted glass windows. The woman who greeted her introduced herself as Marissa Hale. She was younger than Mary expected, but carried herself with calm authority. She didn't smile too brightly or speak too quickly, which Mary found comforting. In her office, surrounded by books and clean folders, Mary explained everything. She told the story plainly, without emotion or embellishment. She laid out the timeline, offered the recordings, passed across copies of her financial documents, and the list of unauthorized withdrawals she suspected. She spoke of the house, the quiet shift in ownership that was never said aloud, but had settled like dust into every corner. She spoke of Lily's whisper, of John's footsteps in the dark, of the camera's quiet truth. And when she was finished, Marissa sat back and said only, "You're not being dramatic, you're being prepared." They worked for 3 hours. Marissa updated Mary's will, leaving the primary structure the same, but adding specific clauses designed to prevent abuse. Mary insisted her autonomy be preserved in writing language that could not be twisted into just in case. They rescinded Evelyn's old medical power of attorney and appointed Marissa as the default proxy should no family member qualify. Marissa offered the name of a financial advisor who could help restructure Mary's accounts into a trust, something that would give her legal protection while still allowing flexibility. By the time Mary left the office, her hands trembled, but not with fear. She felt clean. Certain. The doubts that had clung to her in whispers and shadows now had shape. The pieces were moving, and they were hers. That evening, she returned home to the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary. Evelyn stood at the stove, a glass of wine in one hand, her voice light as she asked how Mary's outing had gone. Mary said she'd just run errands. Evelyn didn't press. She never really listened anymore. John passed her in the hallway with his usual grin, but there was something harder in it now, something that resembled warning. Mary nodded at him, calm and unreadable. On Wednesday morning, a text came from Evelyn. Family dinner Saturday, just us. Don't worry about anything. We've got it covered. There was a smiley face at the end that made Mary's stomach turn. It was not an invitation. It was a strategy. She called Susan later that afternoon. Susan didn't say much, only reminded her to remain composed, to let them speak first, and to be ready. The moment they hand you papers, record everything, she said. Let them bury themselves. Mary charged the small audio recorder she'd used for her garden notes, then placed it in a hollowed cookbook that hadn't been moved from the dining room shelf in years. She prepared everything, new batteries, a second flash drive, copies of her updated documents hidden in 3 different places. She even practiced her expressions in the mirror, neutral, curious, never confrontational. Saturday arrived with unsettling cheer. Evelyn lit candles on the dining table, laid out cloth napkins, and put on soft jazz through the speakers. John brought in takeout from a trendy downtown bistro and announced it with performative pride. Lily was at a sleepover too convenient to be coincidence. Mary noticed how stiff Deidre seemed, seated at the far end of the table, her fork barely lifting from the plate. They made it through salad. Then Evelyn gently set her utensils aside and folded her hands. Her voice was soothing, careful. Mom, there's something we wanted to talk to you about. Mary looked up, expression neutral. It's just, we've noticed things have been getting a little overwhelming for you lately, Evelyn continued, her tone dipped in false concern. The house, the bills, just everything. And we've been thinking, maybe it's time to let us help more, just to take a little pressure off. John reached into a leather folder beside his plate and slid a manila envelope across the table. These are just some simple documents, he said, feigning casualness. Power of attorney stuff. It doesn't change anything unless you want it to. It's just in case. Mary picked up the folder. Her hands did not tremble. She opened it, leafed through the pages with slow deliberation, her eyes passing over the legal jargon, already familiar. She knew what was there, a quiet transfer of control. Rights surrendered in ink, language designed to look like comfort but built for capture. She set the folder down gently. She looked at Evelyn, then at John. Her mouth moved as if to form a question, then hesitated. Her eyes dropped to the table. She murmured something vague, perhaps, about needing time to think. She smiled a little, small, safe. Evelyn's face softened, triumphant. There's no pressure, Mom, she said sweetly. We just care about you. We want to make sure you're protected. John refilled her water glass, his movements rehearsed. Deidre stared down at her napkin, jaw clenched. After dinner, Mary thanked them both with a warmth she did not feel. She said she appreciated the gesture. She said she would consider it. She even placed the folder into her purse as if it were something to be read over tea. Then she climbed the stairs slowly, entered her bedroom, and locked the door behind her. She sat on the bed in silence, the flicker of candlelight from downstairs still casting shadows on the ceiling. She played the recording back on her phone. The audio was crisp. Clear, every word a thread in the net they'd tried to cast around her. She labeled the file, copied it twice, and stored it alongside the others. By morning, she had an appointment with Marissa. By noon, she was back in the law office, placing the newest recording on the desk. Marissa nodded once and said, "We're ready." The rest of the week unfolded with eerie calm. Evelyn returned to her showings. John carried on with his errands. Deidre avoided Mary's gaze but lingered near the kitchen a little longer each day, as if waiting for something she could not name. Lily returned from her sleepover and drew a picture of a house with vines crawling up the side. She gave it to Mary with a smile that reached all the way into her bones. On Thursday afternoon, a courier arrived with documents from the financial advisor Marissa had recommended. Mary signed them without hesitation, finalizing the trust that would shelter her accounts from manipulation. She sent a copy to the bank, another to Marissa, and placed her own in a locked drawer beneath her wedding album. That night, as rain fell softly on the roof, Mary sat at the dining table alone, a cup of tea steaming between her hands. The house was quiet, but the silence was no longer oppressive. It was alert, watchful. She heard Evelyn's voice drift from the hallway. "She said she needs time, but I think she's close." John's voice followed, lower and sharper. "She'll sign. She always does." Mary smiled faintly and sipped her tea. She would not. Not this time. Not ever again. The envelope arrived by courier 2 weeks later, thin and official, bearing the seal of the county clerk. It was addressed to Mary, though her name was written in large, impersonal print like a label, not a greeting. She opened it at the kitchen table, where Lily had just left behind a drawing of a rabbit holding a bunch of daisies. The sun poured in through the window, casting shadows on the form inside. A petition for legal guardianship. Evelyn was requesting control over Mary's medical, financial, and legal decisions. The language was cold and clinical. It cited recent concerning behaviors, a noted decline in judgment, and a need for structured support. Attached was a signed affidavit from John and a bulleted list of invented incidents, missed appointments, misplaced items, confused conversations. None of them had happened. Mary read it twice. Then she folded the papers and slid them back into the envelope. She did not cry. She did not speak. She simply stood and walked to her study, her fingers steady as she dialed Marissa's number. Marissa answered on the first ring. Within hours, they had compiled a response strategy. Mary's recent cognitive evaluation, dated and notarized. A clean report from her primary physician. Bank records, updated titles, legal affidavits, the audio recording from the dinner, and the dated revisions to her will and trust. They also secured a letter from Lily's teacher, confirming Mary had picked her up on time from school for months. Susan delivered a copy of the hidden camera footage, now preserved with timestamps and backup formats. Every piece was cataloged, cross-referenced, indexed. Marissa had handled contested guardianship cases before. She called this one thin and arrogant. Mary called it betrayal in formal wear. The court date came swiftly, as such hearings often do when urgency is claimed. The courthouse was small and square, its hallways echoing with the business of others' grief. Mary arrived in a charcoal coat and soft leather shoes, carrying no handbag. Deidre met her on the steps, her face pale but resolute. They walked in together, shoulder to shoulder, like they had when they were little and ran errands with their mother. Inside the courtroom, Evelyn sat at the petitioner's table in a tailored suit, her blonde hair swept into a twist, her eyes glassy but dry. John sat beside her, his jaw tight, fingers interlocked. He avoided Mary's gaze. The hearing began with formalities, introductions, recitations of roles and relationships. Evelyn spoke first, her voice measured and polished. She expressed love, concern, a desire to protect. She described Mary's alleged forgetfulness, her supposed growing confusion, the strained energy of their shared home. She said she had tried to bring it up gently. She said Mary had resisted, and they feared for her well-being. John echoed her statements with vague details, citing stress, unpredictability, and the need for structure. Marissa remained calm throughout, taking notes, nodding slightly. When Mary was called to speak, she stood slowly. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She simply told the truth. She recounted her routines, the contents of her safe, the late-night entries, the whisper of her granddaughter, the fear, the silence, the decision to act. She spoke of her estate, her trust, her legal protections, her autonomy. She did not speak in anger. She spoke in precision. Then Marissa introduced the evidence, the recordings, the notarized documents, the updated accounts, the financial statements, the letters. The judge listened, silent but attentive, reading each page as it was handed over. When Dedra was called, she hesitated only once, her voice catching. Then she said what she needed to say, that she had known something was wrong, that she had chosen to stay silent, that she would no longer do so. Evelyn stared straight ahead. John folded his arms and looked toward the window. The judge took only a brief recess. When he returned, he delivered the ruling clearly and without hesitation. Petition denied. Full rights retained. No evidence of impairment. No authority transferred. He concluded with a stern reminder that guardianship is not a tool of convenience. Then he rose and the hearing ended. Mary exhaled for the first time in days. Outside, the air was bright and cold. Dedra offered to walk her home, but Mary declined. She needed to walk alone. The sun hung low, glancing off windows and leaves. It felt like light for the first time in weeks. She passed a bookstore, paused to glance at the window display, and smiled at a little girl pointing at a puppet behind the glass. The world was turning, ordinary and indifferent. When she returned home, she walked through the front door with slow steps. Evelyn was not there. Neither was John. The house was still. She moved through it carefully, not touching anything. Then she climbed the stairs, entered her bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed. She stayed there for a long time, thinking not of the courtroom or the judge or the folder full of lies. She thought of Richard's laugh, of Lily's drawings, of the way silence could become a weapon in the wrong hands. That night she stood in the garden, wrapped in a shawl, watching the sky turn navy. The tomato vines had withered in the cold, but their frames still stood, stubborn and upright. The next day she made her decision. The house sold faster than expected. The agent said it was the layout, the bones, the potential. Mary didn't mention the memories pressed into every wall. She packed slowly, choosing carefully what to take. She left behind furniture, rugs, the cracked teapot she hadn't used in years. But she kept Richard's cufflinks, Lily's finger paintings, the photo albums, the recipe cards. The day she locked the door for the final time, she didn't look back. Her new home was small, a cottage on the edge of a senior community just outside town. It had white walls, large windows, a narrow garden bed, and silence that belonged only to her. The kitchen held exactly what she needed. No one rearranged drawers. No one left empty coffee mugs without rinsing. No one walked into her room in the dark. She planted tomatoes behind the back porch, spacing them unevenly, smiling as she did. Richard would have teased her for crowding them. They sprouted anyway. Lily came on weekends, bursting in with new drawings, stories, questions. She called the garden The Hours and assigned each tomato plant a name. Mary let her. They spent afternoons painting pots and reading picture books on the porch. Lily never asked why they moved. She seemed to understand. Dedra visited sometimes, bringing groceries or coffee, sitting on the front steps with her coat zipped to the throat. She didn't talk much about what had happened. Neither did Mary. But when Dedra brought over her own savings account paperwork and asked Mary to look it over, Mary knew what it meant. Evelyn didn't call. John didn't write. No one came knocking. Mary didn't wait. She woke with the sun most mornings, made tea, and walked the paths that curved along the edge of the community. Some days she spoke only to the birds or the woman at the gate who nodded without questions. She read long novels. She organized old letters. She breathed. She no longer felt like a guest in her own life. She no longer felt small. And when Lily wrapped her arms around her waist and whispered, "You're my favorite person," Mary believed her, not because the child said it, but because, for the first time in years, she had remembered how it felt to be chosen. Not needed, not leaned on, not quietly erased, but seen. Seen and standing, firm, whole, herself. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next video. You won't want to miss it. And share this one with someone who needs to hear it.